If you're watching this, maybe it's because you felt that slow, creeping chill of being taken for granted. Maybe you know what it's like to realize the people you'd do anything for wouldn't do the same for you. Or maybe you're just here for the story. Either way, pull up a chair. My name is Wesley. I'm 76 years old, and this is the story of how I lost a family and found my freedom. It all started with an ultimatum, delivered with the kind of casual cruelty you only see in people who are absolutely certain of their power over you. And it ended with a weekend at my lakefront cabin, a place of joy, of memory, of love. That became the final resting place for the family I thought I had. I hope my story serves as a warning, or maybe, just maybe, as a little bit of inspiration. Stay with me and you can decide for yourself. The oak dining table, the one my wife Martha and I bought at a flea market 40 years ago and refinished ourselves, felt enormous that day. My children, David and Sarah, sat on the far side, their bodies angled towards each other, as if they were a single unit, a two-headed prosecutor addressing a lone man in the dock. They had that look on their faces, a practiced blend of concern and impatience that I'd come to recognize over the years. It was the look they used when they needed something, when they had decided on a course of action, and my only role was to agree to it. David, my son, cleared his throat. He's a man who fancies himself a commanding presence, all sharp suits, and a voice that's a little too loud in quiet rooms. He ran a hand over his thinning hair and leaned forward, placing his perfectly manicured hands on the polished wood. "Dad," he began, his tone dripping with false solemnity.
Siri.
"We need to talk about the cabin." My heart, an old and tired muscle, gave a familiar, painful lurch. The cabin. It was never just the cabin. It was a sanctuary, a monument to a life well lived. I built half of it with my own two hands right alongside Martha's father. Every pine board held a memory. The scorch mark on the mantelpiece was from a stray ember the first Christmas we spent there with a baby David. The notch on the doorframe marked Sarah's height, year after year. The porch swing, worn smooth by decades of use, was where Martha and I would sit and watch the loons on the water, our hands intertwined, dreaming of a future filled with the laughter of grandchildren. "What about it?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Sarah, my daughter, took over. She was the softer of the two, the one who wielded guilt like a surgeon's scalpel. She had her mother's eyes, a fact she used to her full advantage. "We're worried about you, Daddy," she said, her voice a soft, cloying whisper. "It's too much for you to maintain. All that driving, the upkeep, and financially, it's just sitting there. It's an asset that isn't working for anyone, isn't working for anyone." The words hung in the air, cold and sterile. The cabin was working for me. It was my connection to my past, to my wife, to the man I used to be. It was the only place I still felt Martha's presence so strongly it was like she had just stepped into the next room. David cut back in, getting to the point. "We've had it appraised. The market is hot right now. We're talking a significant amount of money, Dad. Life-changing money." "My life," I said, looking from his eager face to Sarah's, "doesn't need that kind of changing." A flicker of irritation crossed David's face. The mask of concern slipped. "This isn't just about you," he said, his voice hardening. "This is about the family. Sarah and I have needs. The kids have college coming up. This is about securing the future. Their future, not mine. I was just the gatekeeper to their inheritance, and they were tired of waiting for me to shuffle off this mortal coil. I had spent a lifetime providing for them. I'd paid for their college educations, put down payments on their first homes, bailed David out of a disastrous business venture, and funded Sarah's ridiculously lavish wedding. My generosity, once a source of fatherly pride, had somehow curdled into an expectation. My wallet had become my primary defining characteristic. It wasn't about being a father anymore. It was about being a resource, and they had decided it was time to liquidate the final most precious asset. "The cabin isn't for sale," I said, and the finality in my own voice surprised me. "It was your mother's favorite place on earth. It's my home. It's where your own children have spent every summer of their lives. It stays." Sarah's eyes welled up with tears. It was a masterful performance. "But Daddy, Don't you see? We can't build our futures if everything is tied up in the past. It's selfish. Selfish. The word hit me like a physical blow. Me, selfish. After everything, a cold fury, something I hadn't felt in years, began to smolder in my chest. I looked at these two strangers I had raised, these two people who carried my blood, but none of my values, and I saw them for what they truly were, vultures, circling. David, seeing his sister's emotional appeal wasn't working, decided to bring out the heavy artillery. He leaned back, crossing his arms. The false concern was gone completely, replaced by a cold, hard glare. All right, Dad, we didn't want it to come to this, but you're forcing our hand. You can either agree to sell the cabin, and we'll split the proceeds, 3 ways, fair and square, or you won't be seeing us again. I stared at him, uncomprehending. What did you say? Sarah, her tears suddenly gone, chimed in, her voice now as brittle as ice. He means what he says, Dad. If you choose that dusty old cabin over your own family, then that's your choice. But choices have consequences. You won't see us, and you won't see your grandchildren. No more birthdays, no more Christmases, no more summers at the lake. We will be gone. Leo, Chloe, Mia, my grandchildren, my heart. The thought of never again hearing Leo's booming laugh, or seeing Chloe's artistic talent blossom, or holding little Mia's hand as we skipped stones across the water. It was a black, terrifying void opening up at my feet. They knew it, of course. They knew my love for those children was my one great vulnerability. It was the lever they had chosen to pull, the hostage they were willing to use. It was a move of such breathtaking cruelty that it left me speechless. This wasn't a negotiation, it was an execution. They were killing our family right there at Martha's dining table. I looked at their faces, so determined, so certain of their victory. They saw an old man, frail and alone, who would crumble in the face of such a threat. And in that moment something inside me broke. But it wasn't my spirit. It was the last foolish tether of unconditional love I had for them. The smoldering fury in my chest didn't rage. It cooled. It condensed into something hard and sharp and clear. I took a deep breath. I let the silence stretch, watching the confidence in their eyes begin to waver, just a little. They expected me to beg, to cry, to fold. I did none of those things. All right, I said, my voice eerily calm. You win. A look of triumphant relief washed over their faces. David leaned forward again, ready to discuss realtors and timelines, but I held up a hand. On one condition, I continued. If this is going to be goodbye to the cabin, then we'll do it right. I want one last family weekend. All of us. You, your spouses, the grandkids. We'll go up there together. We'll have one last barbecue, one last campfire. We'll say a proper farewell to the place. You owe me that much. You owe your mother's memory that much. David and Sarah exchanged a look. It was a small price to pay for their victory. A weekend of feigning sentimentality in exchange for a 7-figure payday. Of course, Dad, David said, his magnanimous tone returning. That's a great idea. A perfect way to close that chapter. We'll be there, Sarah added, smiling sweetly. They stood up, mission accomplished, and moved towards the door. They gave me brief, awkward hugs that felt more like pat-downs. As they left, I remained seated at the head of the table, alone in the cavernous room. I listened to their car start, to the sound of their laughter as they drove away, already celebrating. I sat there for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in on me. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me. What they didn't understand was that they hadn't broken me. They had unshackled me. The last thing they would ever get from me was that weekend, and I was going to make sure it was one they would never ever forget. It wasn't about revenge yet. At that point, it was purely about survival. The revenge part, well, that would come later. The drive home from that meeting was a blur. The familiar streets of my neighborhood seemed alien, the houses like cardboard cutouts in a play. I was no longer a part of. My hands, spotted with age, gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles were white mountains on a wrinkled map. I wasn't just driving, I was holding on, trying to keep the pieces of my world from flying apart. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I didn't go inside. I just sat in the car, the engine ticking as it cooled, and let the full weight of their betrayal crash down on me. It wasn't a sudden storm, it was the slow crushing pressure of the deep ocean. I thought about Martha. What would she have said? In the early years of our marriage, when David and Sarah were small, she'd often say, "You're too soft on them, Wes. You give them everything." I'd always laughed it off. "What's the point of working so hard, if I can't?" I'd reply. Now her words echoed in the silent car, a prophecy I had been too blind to heed. They mistook my kindness for weakness. For decades they had been making withdrawals from an account of love and support I thought was inexhaustible, never once stopping to make a deposit. Now they were demanding the bank itself. My mind started to drift back, unbidden, to specific moments, little cuts that I had ignored at the time, but now bled in unison. I remembered David, fresh out of college, sitting at that same dining table, pitching me his idea for a tech startup. He was so full of passion, so convincing. He needed $50,000 for seed money. "It's a sure thing, Dad," he'd promised. "I'll pay you back double within a year." I took the money from my retirement savings, a fund Martha and I had painstakingly built. The startup folded in 6 months. When I asked him about the money, he'd shrugged. "That's the risk of investing, Dad. You win some, you lose some." There was no apology, no gratitude for the risk I'd taken. My $50,000 loss was just a footnote in his grand narrative of near success. Then there was Sarah's wedding. She'd come to me with a scrapbook filled with pictures of designer dresses and extravagant venues. "It's the most important day of my life, Daddy," she'd whispered, her eyes wide. "I want it to be perfect." It's what Mom would have wanted. She knew how to use Martha's memory against me. The budget she presented was staggering, far beyond what her fiancé's family was contributing. I ended up liquidating a portfolio of stocks I'd been holding onto for 20 years, stocks meant to be a comfortable cushion for my old age. The wedding was beautiful, a fairy tale. I watched her dance with her new husband, surrounded by opulence I had paid for, and I felt a pang of something, not resentment, not then, just a quiet hollowness. A few months later, I overheard her telling a friend on the phone, "Oh, Dad was happy to do it. He's got plenty." These weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern, a lifetime of me giving, and them taking, the dynamic so deeply ingrained that none of us questioned it anymore. I was the family provider, the safety net, the ATM. That was my role, and now that I was old, with my earning years behind me, they had decided it was time to cash in the infrastructure itself. The cabin wasn't a home to them. It was a final fat bond to be matured. The house phone ringing snapped me back to the present. For a moment I thought it might be one of them, calling to apologize, to take it back. A foolish, desperate hope. I fumbled for the phone in my pocket and saw the name on the screen, Arthur Vance, my lawyer and my closest friend since we were two rookies at the same accounting firm more than 50 years ago. He was the only person on earth other than Martha who knew the true state of my finances and the true state of my heart. I answered, my voice thick. "Art," I managed. "Wes, you sound like you just wrestled a bear and lost," he said. His voice, a gravelly baritone, was a comfort. "What's wrong?" I didn't even try to sugarcoat it. I told him everything. The meeting, the appraisal, the ultimatum, the threat of losing my grandchildren. I laid it all out, the words tumbling out of me in a torrent of pain and disbelief. When I finished, the silence on the other end of the line was heavy. "The ungrateful little monsters," Arthur finally said, his voice laced with a cold anger that mirrored my own. "After everything you've done for them, I've been telling you for years, Wes. They see you as a bank, not a father. I know, Art, I whispered. God help me. I know that now. So what are you going to do? He asked. Are you really going to let them bully you into selling the cabin? They're going to take my grandkids away, Art, I said, the words catching in my throat. Leo, Chloe, Mia, they're my world. I know they are, he said gently. But let me ask you something, my friend. What kind of relationship will you have with them anyway, under these conditions? One where every visit, every phone call is conditional on your compliance. Where you have to buy their affection. That's not love, Wes. That's a hostage situation. And you're teaching those kids by example that this kind of emotional blackmail is acceptable. You'd be handing your own children the tools to manipulate their own kids later on. His words were stark, logical, and they cut through the fog of my grief. He was right. What life would it be, living under the constant threat of their disapproval, walking on eggshells, waiting for the next demand? I would be a visitor in my own life, a guest whose welcome could be revoked at any moment. The love I had for my grandchildren would become a chain they used to lead me around. What's the alternative? I asked, my voice hollow. To never see them again? To die alone? Being alone and being lonely are two different things, Wes, Arthur said, his tone softening. You've been lonely for years, surrounded by people who only see what they can get from you. Maybe being alone is the first step to not being lonely anymore. He paused. My kids are starting to do it too, you know. Not as crude as yours, but it's there. Little suggestions. Dad, this house is so big for just you. Have you looked at the brochures for Silver Creek Meadows? They're not trying to steal from me. Not yet. They're trying to manage me. To put me in a neat little box where they don't have to worry. They think they're being kind, but it's the same root problem. They see an old man who needs to be handled, not a person who still has a life to live. Hearing his story, a milder echo of my own, solidified something in me. This wasn't just my fight. It was a fight for dignity. It was a fight against being erased before you were even gone. I sat up straighter in the car seat. The image of David's smug face, so sure of his victory, flashed in my mind. The memory of Sarah's calculated tears, the cold, transactional nature of their love, and the smoldering ember of my anger finally found the oxygen it needed. It didn't burst into a wildfire. It ignited a pilot light, a small, steady blue flame of pure resolve. They wanted me to choose, the cabin or them. They thought I would choose them, and in doing so give them the cabin. But they had miscalculated. They had framed the question incorrectly. The choice wasn't between a place and a group of people. The choice was between a legacy of love and a legacy of greed. Between Martha's memory and their demands. Between living my remaining years as a prisoner and living them as a free man. Art, I said, and my voice was different. The tremor was gone. It was replaced by a quiet, steady calm. You're a good lawyer, right? I'm a damn good lawyer, he said, and an even better friend. Why? Because I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face for the first time that day. I think I have some work for you. A lot of work. They want me to liquidate an asset. Fine, I'll liquidate. But I'm not just liquidating the cabin. I took a deep breath, the decision settling into my bones, feeling more right than anything had in years. Art, I'm liquidating everything. There was another pause on the line, but this time I could almost hear. Now you sound like the Wes I know, he said. The one who doesn't get mad. He gets even. Tell me the plan. And so I did. Sitting there in my car, in the driveway of the house that would soon be for sale, I began to outline the silent, systematic dismantling of the life my children thought they owned. It wasn't about revenge in that moment. It was about justice. It was about taking back the narrative of my own life. The weekend at the cabin was no longer a sad farewell. It was a stage, and I was about to write the final act. The days that followed were a whirlwind of focused activity, a secret campaign waged in plain sight. My children, believing they had won, left me alone. They were likely busy, I imagined, browsing online boat catalogs and dreaming of luxury vacations. Soik spitted. Their silence was the greatest gift they could have given me, a cloak of invisibility under which I could assemble my arsenal. My grief and despair had been transmuted, forged in the fires of betrayal, into something cold, hard, and purposeful. It wasn't about revenge until it was. And I was beginning to understand that the most satisfying revenge isn't a loud, angry explosion, but the quiet, methodical turning of a key in a lock they never knew existed. My first call after that night was to set up a meeting with Arthur at his downtown office. Walking into the familiar, book-lined room felt like entering a war council. Arthur wasn't just my lawyer, he was my field marshal. He had that bulldog look on his face, a mix of grim determination and a kind of fierce loyalty that you can't buy. He'd already pulled up the deeds to my properties, the initial statements for my investment accounts. "Okay, Wes," he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Walk me through it again, from the top. And don't leave anything out. When you say everything, you mean everything?" "Art," I confirmed, settling into the worn leather chair opposite his desk. "The main house, the cabin, the portfolio of stocks and bonds, the money market accounts, the IRA, the 401k from the old firm, every last cent. I want it all turned into cash. A scorched earth withdrawal from the Bank of Dad." Arthur whistled, a low, long sound. "That's a significant taxable event, Wes. You'll take a huge hit on the retirement accounts for early withdrawal, even at your age. The capital gains on the stocks and properties will be massive. You're talking about giving up a quarter, maybe even a third of it, right off the top to Uncle Sam." This is where I leaned on the principle of plausible inaccuracy that so many stories use. I know enough to sound like I know what I'm talking about, but the details are designed to be debated. "That's fine," I said calmly. "It's not my money anymore, it's a statement. And besides, what's left will be more than enough for my purposes. The point isn't to maximize the total. The point is to control its destination." He nodded slowly, getting it. "And that destination is an irrevocable trust," I said, savoring the words. "The strongest one you can build. A legal fortress. The sole beneficiaries are to be my grandchildren, Leo, Chloe, and Mia, equal shares." "And the trustees?" Arthur asked, already scribbling notes. "You and me," I said. "With you having sole authority if I become incapacitated or pass away. And here's the most important part, Art. The money cannot be touched by anyone, for any reason, until each grandchild turns 25. Not for college, not for a car, not for a down payment on a house. Nothing. Until their 25th birthday, that money is as good as on the moon." Arthur looked up from his notepad, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Oh, that is vicious, Wes. That is beautifully, poetically vicious. You're not just cutting off your children, you're making them watch their own kids' inheritance sit in a vault, completely inaccessible, for years. They'll know the money is there, but they won't be able to use it as a slush fund or leverage it for loans. They'll have to actually parent. It's not for them," I said firmly. "It's for the kids. By the time they're 25, they'll be their own people. They'll have finished college, hopefully, on their own steam, or with student loans like normal people. They'll have a few years of work under their belts. They'll be old enough to understand the value of that money, and more importantly, old enough that their parents can't easily manipulate them into handing it over." "It's a good plan," Arthur said. "A solid plan. But it's going to be a mad dash to get all this done before your goodbye weekend." And it was. Arthur put me in touch with a financial advisor he trusted, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s, named Evelyn Reed. Her office was the opposite of Arthur's, all glass and steel and minimalist furniture. She looked at the portfolio I brought in, her eyes scanning the pages with an unnerving speed. "Mr. Miller," she said, using my last name, which felt formal and oddly respectful. "This is a well-managed conservative portfolio built over a lifetime. It's designed for steady, long-term income. You're asking me to liquidate it in what amounts to a fire sale. Are you absolutely certain?" I looked her in the eye. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life, Miss Reed." She held my gaze for a moment, searching for something: doubt, confusion, coercion. Seeing none, she gave a crisp nod. "Very well, it's your money. I will execute the sell orders. It'll take several business days for the funds to clear and be transferred. The real estate will be the long pole in the tent." That was my next stop. Ben Carter, a local realtor who had a reputation for being fast and discreet. He was a cheerful, round man, whose smile never quite reached his eyes. He walked through my home, the place I'd brought Martha as a bride, the place I'd raised my children. He saw square footage, and comps, and market value. I saw ghosts in every room. "This will sell fast," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Great bones, desirable neighborhood. We can get it on the market by Monday." He hesitated. "Are you sure you don't want to stage it? A few rented pieces of furniture, a coat of neutral paint. It can really boost the price." "No," I said, a bit too sharply. "Sell it as is. I want it sold quickly, not for top dollar." He gave me a strange look but shrugged. A fast commission was a fast commission. We moved on to the cabin. I couldn't bear to take him there, so I just gave him the keys and the address. It felt like a betrayal, handing over the keys to that sacred place, to a stranger who would see it only as lake frontage and a selling feature. The next 2 weeks were a blur of paperwork. I signed power of attorney documents for Arthur and Evelyn. I signed listing agreements with Ben. I went to the bank and consolidated accounts, closing safety deposit boxes filled with old war bonds and Martha's jewelry. I kept her wedding ring, of course. Everything else became a number on a ledger. Every evening I would come home to my house, which felt less like a home with each passing day. The walls seemed to be closing in, filled with the echoes of a life I was systematically dismantling. I packed one suitcase with clothes and essentials. Then I began packing boxes, not of things to keep, but of memories. Old photo albums, the kids' report cards, Martha's gardening journals. I took them not to my new small rented apartment, but to a storage unit. A time capsule of a life that was now officially over. There was one moment of doubt. I was holding a small silver-framed photo of a 5-year-old Sarah on my lap at the cabin, both of us grinning, a string of tiny fish held up between us. Her face was so full of pure, uncomplicated love. My heart ached with a sudden sharp pain. Was I being too harsh? Was I throwing away the good with the bad? Was I becoming the monster they accused me of being? I almost picked up the phone to call it all off. My hand was hovering over the receiver when Arthur called me, as if by instinct. "Just checking in, Wes," he said. "How are you holding up?" I told him about the photograph, about my sudden wave of doubt. He was quiet for a moment. "I get it, Wes. That's the little girl you remember. But she's not that little girl anymore. People change. Let me tell you about my son Mark. Last week he brought over a brochure for that retirement village again. He said, 'Dad, we just want you to be safe.' It sounds so loving, doesn't it? But then I found out from his wife that they're planning to remodel their kitchen. A big, expensive one. They're not worried about my safety. They're worried about their future access to my equity. They're just smart enough to wrap the greed in the language of care. Your kids skipped that step. They just served you the grade. Raw. Don't forget that. Don't let a memory of who they were blind you to who they are now." His words, born of his own quiet struggle, were the steel rod I needed for my spine. He was right. I wasn't punishing the little girl in the photograph. I was protecting myself and my grandchildren from the woman she had become. I put the photo in the box with the others and sealed the lid. The day before the final weekend, all the pieces fell into place. Evelyn called to confirm the last of the funds had been transferred. Ben called to tell me he had an all-cash, no contingency offer on my house, well over asking price, from a developer who wanted the land. The cabin had 3 competing offers already. Everything was in motion. The final step was the most important. I met Arthur at his office one last time. On his desk was a thick, leather-bound folder. "The irrevocable trust of the Miller grandchildren," he said, tapping it with his finger. "Ironclad. Airtight. The only way they're getting into this thing before they're 25 is with a platoon of attorneys and a time machine." Read it carefully. I did. I read every clause, every subsection. It was all there. My grandchildren as sole beneficiary. Me and Arthur as co-trustees. The non-distribution clause, until the age of 25. It was a masterpiece of legal protection. It protected the money from my children, from future spouses, from creditors. Most importantly, it protected my grandchildren from the poison of unearned wealth. It gave them a future, but it made them work for their present. I picked up the heavy, expensive pen Arthur offered me. My hand was steady. As I signed my name on the final page, I didn't feel loss. I didn't feel anger. I felt light. A weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for decades, the weight of their expectations, their disappointments, their endless need, lifted from my shoulders. I was no longer Wesley Miller, father, provider, and open wallet. I was just Wesley, a man with one suitcase, a rented apartment, and a secret. "It's done," I said, laying the pen down. "It's done," Arthur confirmed, closing the binder with a solid, satisfying thud. "Are you ready for the weekend?" I looked out his window at the city below, a city that was no longer really my home. "Art," I said with a thin smile. "I've been ready for this weekend my whole life." The drive up to the cabin for the last time felt different. I wasn't driving toward a painful ending, but toward a necessary conclusion. The air grew cooler and cleaner as I left the city behind, the scent of pine and damp earth replacing the exhaust fumes. When I turned onto the long gravel driveway, the familiar crunch of the tires felt like a drum roll. The cabin stood exactly as it always had, a sturdy, welcoming presence nestled among the tall pines, the lake shimmering like a sheet of hammered silver behind it. For a moment, my resolve wavered. This place was my soul made of wood and stone. Giving it up felt like a kind of self-mutilation. But then I remembered the cold, dead look in my children's eyes, and the feeling passed. The cabin was already gone. They had killed it that day at the dining table. This was just the funeral. I spent the first few hours just walking through the rooms, touching things, saying my own private goodbyes. I ran my hand over the rough-hewn mantelpiece, my fingers tracing the scorch mark from that first Christmas. I stood in the doorway to the small bedroom Sarah had claimed as her own, the walls still covered in the faded glow-in-the-dark stars we'd stuck up there together. I went out to the workshop, a place that smelled of sawdust and oil, and my father-in-law's pipe tobacco, a scent that lingered after 30 years. I wasn't just saying goodbye to a building, I was saying goodbye to the man I was when I was here. The husband, the young father, the happy man. It was a quiet, profound grief, but it was clean. It was mine alone, unburdened by the demands of others. They were due to arrive in the late afternoon. I busied myself with preparations, but not the ones they'd expect. I didn't fire up the grill or get out the fishing rods. Instead, I built a fire in the large stone fireplace, the heart of the home. I laid the logs carefully, just as I had 1,000 times before. I made a pot of coffee and set out a bottle of the good whiskey, the one reserved for special occasions. This I supposed qualified. Right on time, 2 shiny, expensive SUVs came rolling down the driveway, a cloud of dust in their wake. The doors opened and my family spilled out. David and his wife Karen, a woman who always looked vaguely disappointed with her surroundings. Sarah and her husband Tom, a man so bland he seemed to be actively trying to blend in with the background. And then the lights of my life, Leo, my grandson, now a lanky 18-year-old with my eyes and a shy smile, and my granddaughters, 16-year-old Chloe, clutching a sketchbook, and 12-year-old Mia, who immediately broke free and ran towards me. "Grandpa!" she yelled, throwing her arms around my legs. I hugged her tight, burying my face in her hair, breathing in the scent of sunshine and childhood. I squeezed her and felt a pang of guilt. My actions would have consequences for her, too. But I had to believe this was the only way to protect her in the long run. I looked up and saw Leo and Chloe watching me, their expressions a mixture of affection and the awkwardness of their teenage years. I gave them a warm smile, one that I hoped conveyed a love that was separate from the mess with their parents. My own children, however, were already in business mode. David clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to seem friendly, but felt more like he was checking the structural integrity of an old building. "Hey, Dad, place looks great, smells the same. Good to be here. Last time for everything," Sarah said, a little too brightly, as she breezed past me into the house. "Oh, the memories. It's sad, isn't it? But it's for the best." It was all a performance. They walked through the cabin, pointing things out to their spouses. "Remember when we refinished this floor, honey? Dad paid for the sander. Oh, look, the old canoe. Tom, you'll never guess what Dad had to pay to get that thing restored after I capsized it." Every memory was attached to a price tag. My life's work, my love, was being itemized for sale. They were like squatters who had mistaken themselves for inheritors. I let them settle in. I watched them unpack their things, their weekend bags filled with clothes for relaxing, for one last swim, one last boat ride. They were completely at ease, basking in the glow of their impending victory. They treated me with a kind of gentle, condescending patience, the way you might treat a beloved but slightly senile old pet. They asked if I needed help, if I was comfortable, if I'd remembered to take my medication. It was all for show, a pantomime of caring. The afternoon wore on. I saw David on his phone down by the dock, no doubt talking to a financial planner of his own. Sarah was taking pictures of the interior with her phone. I suspected for the real estate listing she assumed she would be managing. They were so transparent, so consumed by their greed that they couldn't even fake it for a few hours. They kept trying to bring the conversation around to the sale. "So, Dad, have you given any thought to which realtor we should use?" David asked as he grabbed a beer from the fridge. "I have a guy in the city who specializes in high-end recreational properties. He's a real shark." "We'll talk about it later, David," I said calmly. "Let's just enjoy the evening. I'm making my famous chili for dinner. Let the kids have one last good meal here." My quiet deferral only seemed to fuel their confidence. They saw it as me being sentimental, emotional, dragging my feet before the inevitable. They patronized me, patting my arm and saying, "Of course, Dad. Whatever you want. It's your weekend." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. My weekend. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees and painting the lake in hues of orange and purple, the tension began to shift. My calm was starting to unnerve them. They had expected me to be melancholy, perhaps even weepy. They were prepared to manage my grief. They were not prepared for my quiet composure. It didn't fit the script they had written in their heads. After our silent, tense dinner, where the grandchildren's innocent chatter was the only thing filling the void, I saw Sarah whisper something to David. He nodded. The time had come. They were getting impatient. The pleasantries were over. "Dad," David said, pushing his empty chili bowl away. "This has been great, really. But we should probably talk business. We need to get the ball rolling on this. Papers to sign." "Yes, Daddy," Sarah added, her voice soft and persuasive. "The sooner we do it, the sooner we can all move on." I looked around the table at all of them, at my son and daughter, their faces masks of avarice, at their spouses, silent accomplices, at my grandchildren, who were looking back and forth between us, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Mia's face was puckered with worry. This was it, the moment of truth. I stood up from the table. "You're right," I said. "The time for talking is over. Let's go into the living room. There's something I need to tell you all." I looked directly at the children. "You should hear this too." I walked over to the fireplace and stood before it, my back to the crackling flames. The room was cast in a warm, flickering light, a stark contrast to the coldness that was about to descend. They all followed me, arranging themselves on the old, comfortable sofas and armchairs, their bodies leaning forward in anticipation. They thought this was the moment of my final surrender. They thought I was about to give them what they wanted. They had no idea I was about to take everything away. They settled on the couches, a nervous energy filling the room. David sat forward, his elbows on his knees, looking like a coach about to give a halftime speech. Sarah arranged herself delicately on the armchair, trying to project an aura of gentle sympathy. Their spouses, Karen and Tom, hovered in the background, professional spectators at a drama they had a financial stake in. My grandchildren were clustered together on the large ottoman, their young faces itched with confusion. Little Mia had her thumb in her mouth, a habit I thought she'd broken years ago. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting the crackle of the fire fill the space. I looked at each of them, my gaze lingering for a second on David, then Sarah. I wanted to burn this image into my memory, their smug, expectant faces poised on the brink of a victory they believed was already won. "You came here this weekend for a closing," I began, my voice steady and clear. "A farewell to the cabin. You wanted to finalize our agreement to sell this place and divide the assets. You gave me an ultimatum, and I accepted your terms." David nodded, a tight, satisfied smile on his lips. "That's right, Dad. It's for the best." "I'm glad you think so," I said, "because I have some news for you. I've taken your advice to heart. You said this place was an asset just sitting here, not working for anyone. You said it was time to be practical, to think about the future." I paused, letting my words sink in. So I did. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. It was a copy of the sale agreement for the cabin. "The good news," I said, looking directly at David and Sarah, "is that you don't have to worry about finding a realtor. You don't have to worry about staging or listings or signing any paperwork." I unfolded the paper, because I've already sold it. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so total that the pop of a log in the fireplace sounded like a gunshot. David's smile froze, then slowly dissolved. Sarah's brow furrowed in confusion. "What?" David said, the word coming out as a croak. "What do you mean, you sold it? Without us? We had an agreement." "Our agreement," I corrected him gently, "was that I would sell the cabin." I did. I honored my end of the bargain. Sarah found her voice. "But the money? The split? You were supposed to consult us." "Ah," I said, and for the first time I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "This is where we seem to have had a miscommunication. You see, I took your financial advice so seriously, I decided to apply it more broadly. You were right. I had too many assets tied up in the past, so I didn't just sell the cabin. I let that hang in the air for a beat. I sold the house, too. Got a fantastic all-cash offer from a developer. It closes next week." Their jaws literally dropped. Karen, David's wife, let out a small gasp. "And the stock portfolio," I continued, my voice gaining strength with each revelation, "all liquidated. The bonds, the mutual funds, the IRAs, the 401k, all of it, cashed out, turned into a single tidy pile of money." David was on his feet now, his face turning a blotchy red. "You did what? Are you insane? The taxes, the penalties. You threw away a fortune." "It was my fortune to throw, wasn't it?" I replied calmly. "But don't you worry. Even after paying Uncle Sam his due, it was still a very, very significant sum. Life-changing money, as you put it. Sarah stood up, her face pale, her eyes wide, with a dawning horror. "Daddy, what did you do with the money?" she whispered. The word daddy, now a desperate plea, instead of a term of endearment. This was the moment, the checkmate. I looked past my children, my gaze finding my grandchildren on the ottoman. I looked at Leo, Chloe, and Mia. "I secured the family's future," I said, my voice softening as I spoke to them. "Just like your parents wanted. The entire proceeds, from the sale of the cabin, the house, and every last stock and bond I owned, have been placed into a legal trust." I turned my gaze back to David and Sarah, who were staring at me as if I'd grown a second head. "It's called an irrevocable trust. It's a beautiful legal instrument. It means the money is locked away, protected. It can't be touched. It can't be squandered on bad business ideas or lavish lifestyles. It's there to grow, safely." David was shaking his head, trying to process it. "A trust? For who? For us?" "No, David," I said, the finality in my voice like the closing of a vault door. "Not for you. The sole beneficiaries of the trust are Leo, Chloe, and Mia." A strangled sound escaped Sarah's throat. Leo's eyes were wide. Chloe had her hand over her mouth. "They will each inherit their share, 1/3 of my entire life savings," I announced to the But, and this is the important part, the part that ensures it's used wisely, they cannot access a single penny of it until their 25th birthday. The room erupted. "No," David shouted, his voice cracking. "You can't do that. That's our inheritance. That's our money." "It was never your money, David," I said, my voice cutting through his rage. "It was mine. A fact you seem to have forgotten. You demanded I choose between this cabin and my family. You threatened to take my grandchildren from me. You used my love for them as a weapon. You have made it abundantly clear that you cannot be trusted with my legacy. So I have entrusted it to them, instead. At an age when I pray, they will have more wisdom and gratitude than you have shown." Sarah started to sob, real tears this time, tears of pure, unadulterated loss. "How could you do this to us, Daddy? After everything we've been through, we're your family." "A family doesn't issue ultimatums," I shot back, my own voice finally rising, with the passion I had suppressed for so long. "A family doesn't hold love hostage. You stopped being my family when you sat at your mother's table and tried to blackmail a lonely old man. You wanted a transaction. Congratulations, the transaction is complete. My assets have been liquidated and secured." I took a deep breath, composing myself. I turned to my stunned, silent grandchildren. "I love you all," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "more than you will ever know. This isn't a punishment for you. It's a gift. It's the gift of a future, a safety net that no one can take from you. Live your lives, work hard, be good people, and when you are old enough to understand, I hope you'll see this was the only way I could protect you from the greed that has poisoned your parents." I looked back at David and Sarah, who were now just staring at me, defeated, their faces a canvas of shock and impotent fury. "So," I said, my voice returning to its calm, quiet state, "I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Enjoy the cabin. Say your goodbyes. It's the last thing you will ever get from me." And with that, I turned around, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. I got into my old car, the only thing I still owned besides the clothes in my suitcase, and I drove down that gravel road for the very last time. In my rearview mirror, I saw the warm glow of the cabin lights, a place that no longer held any power over me. It was no longer a sanctuary, and it was no longer a prison. It was just a house someone else now owned, and I was free. I drove for hours that night with no destination in mind, just the open road ahead of me. The farther I got from that cabin, the lighter I felt. The fury was gone. The pain was gone. All that remained was a profound, quiet peace. I had lost a house, a cabin, a stock portfolio. I had lost 2 children who had in truth been lost to me long ago, but I had regained myself. My new life is simple. I live in a small, clean, rented apartment a few states away in a town where nobody knows my name. I have my social security, a small pension, and enough cash from the sale to live comfortably for the rest of my days. It's not a lot, but it's more than enough. My expenses are few. I spend my mornings reading, my afternoons walking in the local park, and my evenings talking to my only real family, my old friend Arthur. He tells me about the fallout, the panicked, abusive phone calls David and Sarah made to his office, the threats of lawsuits. Arthur, bless his cantankerous soul, simply laughed and told them to have their lawyers call him. They did, and their lawyers, after a brief review of the ironclad trust agreement, quietly advised them that they had no case. The money was gone, legally and permanently beyond their reach. The last I heard, David's consulting business was struggling, and he and Karen had to sell their oversized house. Sarah and Tom are apparently in marriage counseling, the financial strain having exposed the cracks in their own foundation. They got what they wanted. I liquidated my assets. They just never considered that the proceeds wouldn't be for them. They were defeated by their own short-sightedness, by an entitlement so profound they couldn't fathom a world where they weren't the center of my universe. Do I miss my grandchildren? Every single day. It is a constant dull ache in my chest. I have their pictures on my small bedside table, and I talk to them sometimes. I have to trust that I did the right thing, that giving them a secure future, free from their parents' influence, was a greater act of love than surrendering to emotional blackmail just to see them. I write them letters, long ones, that I don't send. I put them in a box, along with the photo albums and Martha's journals. One day when they are 25, I'll give it all to them, along with their inheritance. Then they will understand. So I sit here now, in my quiet apartment, a cup of coffee in my hand, watching the world go by outside my window. Was it revenge? I suppose in the end it was. It wasn't a hot, passionate revenge, but a cold, quiet one. The revenge of reclaiming one's own life. The revenge of choosing dignity over subjugation. They tried to write the last chapter of my life, to turn it into a tragedy about a foolish old man. But I picked up the pen and wrote my own ending. And in my version, the old man walks off into the sunset, not with a fortune, but with something far more valuable, his own soul. I wanted to share this story with you because I know I'm not the only one. Maybe you're facing your own ultimatum, your own quiet battle against entitlement and disrespect. Maybe you feel trapped, a resource to be managed rather than a person to be loved. My message to you is this: it is never too late to reclaim your life. It is never too late to choose yourself. Your peace is worth more than their demands. Don't let anyone else hold the pen to your story. Thank you for listening to an old man ramble. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever faced a similar situation, I'd be honored to read your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in my place? Did I go too far, or not far enough? Like this video if you think my children got what they deserved, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength when you need it most. Remember, the greatest asset you have is your own self-respect. Don't ever sell it cheap.